continuing on in your skeletal chapter with joints, page 195 in your anatomy book. And so there are multiple kinds of joints in our body. We have what's called synarthrosis, amphiarthrosis, and diarthrosis. So synarthrosis is a joint that has no movement. Well, when you think of the word joint, we think of movement. We think of our knees and our elbows and our shoulders. And you're like, what do you mean no movement? But remember, the definition of a joint is where two bones come together. Okay. So if two bones are touching, it's a joint. So your no movement joints are the ones in your skull. So remember, our skull was originally separate bones. Well, it came together and became one bone, and it actually has sutures, which is like stitches. So sutures, like a scar in the bone of where the bone is now fused together. So there's no movement whatsoever once that happens. And that's what the picture there is describing, is that skull bone. And these are all the sutures here that I'm talking about, okay, where all these come together. Right. And when we were babies, they were all separate bones. The next one is the amphiarthrosis, and it talks about that pubis that I touched on in the last video. Amphiarthrosis means slight movement, little movement, and that is in the pelvic joint, which moves when a woman is carrying a baby. So as that baby gets large in those late months of pregnancy and those hips are opening up, it's the pubic joint that has actually got the movement. However, the majority of joints that we think of when we think of the word joint are diarthrosis. Those are the ones that have a lot of movement. And with your diarthrosis, we have different kinds of joints depending on what movement is being allowed in that joint. Okay. So we have a hinge joint. A hinge joint is the elbow and the knee. Open, it's like a door, open and shut, open and shut. A pivot joint just goes back and forth, and that's like your neck bones, your vertebrae. A saddle joint is where your thumb and your hand come together. There's a lot of movement there in your thumb, more than what you have in your fingers. Your fingers are more like a hinge. Your saddle joint in your thumb has a lot of roundness to its movement. Condyloid is the very top vertebrae of your skull. I told you it was called the atlas, and so this is called the atlanto-occipital. It's where the atlas and the occipital bones come together, and it's more oval shaped than round. A ball and socket joint is your hip and your shoulder. It's what allows the baseball pitcher to pitch a game, because you've got a huge amount of movement in that shoulder and in your hip. And the last one is called a gliding joint, and you find that in the vertebrae, not so much necessarily in the neck. The neck's more of a pivot, but when you get down to those lower back, that's all it can do is go back and forth, forward and back. That's all you can do with those joints, okay? Okay, joint movements. Flexion means to reduce the angle of a joint. And extension is to increase the angle of a joint. So here's my joint. This is a 90-degree angle, kind of close to it. So if I'm going to increase the angle, I'm extending my arm. If I flex, I am decreasing the angle and bringing it down to close to zero. Okay? Flexion and extension, these are opposites of each other. Abduction and adduction. Abduction, adduction. Abduction is moving away from the body. Adduction is to bring it back to the body. So abduction, move away from the body. Think of getting abducted by aliens. You are getting taken away. So the arm is getting taken away from the body. Adding means I'm putting two things together. I'm adding two numbers together, or I'm adding the arm back to the body, is adduction. Rotation is shaking your head no. Circumduction is the 180 degrees that your arm can do. Okay, I could extend my arm, do it that way. I don't really have enough room right here to do that. Hip replacements. God, just an incredible surgery they can do. Degeneration or a broken hip, and we can go in there and they drill this out, and this is all metal. They put this down into the femur bone, and they give you a new hip socket, and you can walk again. It's just amazing. And there isn't a picture, but like you could do the same with a knee replacement, and you put in the metal, and like pain is gone. It's just amazing. My mom has had a double knee replacement. My husband needs a knee replacement. They say he's too young. It's just an incredible surgery that heals so many people. All right, we're going to stop here, and then the next video we'll finish out the rest of the chapter all in that next video. So stay tuned.